Welcome to my YouTube channel, watching Crime Time, and this is the updated case of the white supremacist Payton Gendron, Buffalo supermarket killer who shot 10 innocent people, killing them, injuring 3 others in a racist shooting. Um, there's been an update in this case. The justice system is seeking the death penalty in his federal case, and I wanted to talk about it today. So make sure you like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, hit the thumbs up so you'll be notified every single time I drop a video. Hit my Cash App, money sign capital CPA 106. Again, money sign capital CPA 106. Hit the Cash App. Buffalo shooter who killed 10 at Taps Supermarket is to face death penalty in federal case. Federal prosecutors will seek the death penalty against a white supremacist who killed 10 black people in a mass shooting at a Buffalo supermarket. They said in a court filing Friday, Payton Gendron, 20, is already serving a sentence of life in prison with no chance of parole after he pleaded guilty to state charges of murder and hate-motivated domestic terrorism in the 2022 attack, which was 2 years ago. The Justice Department in the filing said that the United States believes the circumstances are such that, in the evidence of conviction, a sentence of death is justified. New York does not have capital punishment, but the Justice Department had the option of seeking the death penalty in a separate federal hate crimes case. The government had promised to plead guilty in that case if prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. In Friday's notice announcing the decision to seek the death penalty, Trini Ross, U.S. Attorney for the Western New York, cited the substantial planning that went into the shooting, including the choice of location, a Tops-friendly market in the city's largely black East Side neighborhood, which she said was meant to maximize the number of black victims. Relatives of the victims had expressed mixed views on whether they thought federal prosecutors should pursue the death penalty. After meeting with prosecutors hours before a Friday hearing in the case, some family members of the victims shared their thoughts. I'm not necessarily disappointed in the decision. It would have justified me more knowing that he would have spent the rest of his life in prison, being surrounded by the population of people he tried to kill, said Mark Talley, whose 63-year-old mother, Geraldine Talley, was killed. I would prefer he spent the rest of his life in prison suffering every day, he added. Pamela Pritchard, whose 77-year-old mother, Pearl Young, was killed in the attack, said the mood was somber. I will be scared, everybody. I will be scarred. Everybody, every family, the community of the East Side, we're all going to be scarred, she said. For me, my goal is to look at the scar and know that I am healed. Several other family members of the victims left without speaking. The families believe that a decision has been made, so the future path has some certainty, although no decision can eliminate the pain and suffering they continue to experience. Attorney Terrence Connor said in a statement. Defense attorney Sonia Zaglin said the government's lawyers were deeply disappointed with the decision and emphasized that he was 18 when he carried out the massacre. Rather than a prolonged and traumatic capital prosecution, the efforts of the federal government would be better spent on combating the forces that facilitated this terrible crime, including easy access to deadly weapons and the failure of social media companies to moderate the hateful rhetoric and images that circulated online, Zuckerman said in a statement. On May 14, 2022, the gunman attacked shoppers and workers with a semi-automatic rifle at the supermarket after driving more than 200 miles from his home in rural Conklin, New York. He chose the business for its location in a predominantly black neighborhood and live-streamed the massacre from a camera attached to his tactical helmet. The victims, who range in ages from 32 to 86, included 8 customers, the store security guard, and a church deacon who drove shoppers to and from the store, were the groceries. 3 people were wounded but survived. The rifle the gunman fired was marked with racial slurs and phrases including the Great Replacement, a reference to a conspiracy theory that there was a plot to diminish the influence of white people. The Justice Department has made federal death penalty cases a rarity since the election of President Biden, who opposes capital punishment. This is the first time Attorney General Merrick Garland has authorized a new pursuit of the death penalty under his leadership. The Justice Department has permitted the continuation of 2 capital prosecutions and withdrawn from pursuing death in more than 2 dozen cases. Garland, Garland ins- instituted a moratorium on federal executions in 2021 pending a review of procedures. Although the moratorium does not prevent prosecutors from seeking death sentences, the Justice Department has done so sparingly. It successfully sought the death penalty for a anti-Semitic gunman who murdered 11 people at a Pittsburgh synagogue, which had been authorized as a death penalty case before Garland became Attorney General. It also went ahead last year with an effort to get the death penalty against an Islamic extremist who killed 8 people on a New York City bike path. Their lack of animosity jury meant that prosecution resulted in a life sentence. I think that's unanimous. The Justice Department has declined to pursue the death penalty in other mass shootings. It passed on seeking the execution of a gunman who killed 23 people at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas. Now, here's the news video.
He's been sentenced to life without parole in the state case, but he still faces 27 federal counts, including hate crime and firearm charges. For more, let's bring in ABC News' Morgan Norwood and ABC News legal contributor Brian Buckmeyer. Brian, what goes into this decision of whether or not to seek the death penalty, and why seek it here but not at the state level?
Afternoon, sorry. Well, what goes into it is the actual charges themselves, and then also they look to the aggravating factors that they believe they can prove in a case to ultimately get them past that threshold of the death penalty. I'm thinking of the heinousness of the crime, the number of victims, the fact that a crime occurred while the murders were occurring as well as the preparation and premeditation of the crime. These factors, I think, go into it. And in terms of answering the question why the death penalty at the federal level and not the state level, well, the state of New York doesn't have the death penalty, but the federal government does. And so that's why we're seeing different sentencing levels at different levels of criminal culpability.
Usual is it to seek the death penalty in a federal case?
It's not very unusual. We've seen it a number of times. However, I think it's more unusual on the back end as to whether or not it happens. We saw 13 federal executions near the end of former President Donald Trump's presidency. But before that, there was a 17-year hiatus. In fact, currently, there's a moratorium on the death penalty in the federal government through President Joe Biden. So really, when we talk about the potential for someone being executed, it's really about what future presidents may think about whether or not someone should be put to death.
Morgan, what have you heard from the families on this?
Well, Diana can say that this was a racially motivated attack, and so we know that the DOJ, the Justice Department, has faced growing pressure to send a clear and strong message about these types of cases. So I'd imagine for the family, I mean, look, they've had delays with this case before. I mean, the time that it's taken for the DOJ to decide, I've heard from family members say that this was agonizing for them. So for them, this is the first step as they continue the journey on closure and healing.
Brian, there's a federal hearing set for this afternoon. What do you expect to come out of that?
I think the announcement that they're seeking the death penalty, the justification for it as well, and there might be some negotiation as to when the next court date is, because as you've already told us, the shooter has already pled guilty in state court. One would assume that if he can avoid the death penalty through a plea negotiation, or maybe even plead guilty and do what we saw in Florida with the Florida school shooting where he ultimately got life in prison, this might be a situation where we avoid any litigation as to guilt or innocence and move towards sentencing where pleading guilty could give you a mitigating factor to help avoid the death penalty.
Morgan, how is the community coping with the tragedy and with the fact that this case is still ongoing?
Yeah, I think you just hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's incredibly tough for them, right? I mean, this is heartbreaking. It shattered this predominantly Black community here. And so they are on the journey for closure. They're on the journey for healing. And so that is what they're looking for. They're continuing to reel. And even this process alone is going to be critical as they continue to search for that. I will say that this shooting, brought up a lot of anger, a lot of hurt, a lot of outrage. So it's likely that we're still seeing that linger even as this process continues, Diane.
All right, Morgan Norwood, Brian Buckmeyer, thank you both.
I said, once again,
This is breaking news from 7 News. Breaking this afternoon, the Justice Department will seek the death penalty against the Tops mass shooter, Payton Gendron. Good afternoon to you. I'm Andrew Ranch. The meeting just ended between Department of Justice representatives and victims' families. The 7 News I-team just obtaining the 5-page notice of intent to seek the death penalty, where the United States government says the sentence of death is justified and that the United States will seek the sentence of death for these offenses: use and discharge of a firearm to commit murder during and in relation to a crime of violence. In this 5-page document, the federal government outlines the reasons why they will continue to pursue the death penalty against the shooter, Payton Gendron. And among those reasons, it's because Payton Gendron intentionally killed Roberta Drury, Pearl Young, Hayward Patterson, Ruth Whitfield, Celestine Cheney, Aaron Salter Jr., Andre McNeil, Marcus Morrison, Catherine Massey, and Geraldine Talley. This also goes on to say that part of the reason why the federal government is pursuing the death penalty here in this federal case is because this was a racially motivated killing. They say Payton Gendron expressed bias, hatred, and contempt toward Black persons, and his animus toward Black persons played a role in the killings of those 10 people. The federal government goes on to say the selection of site played a huge role here, in that Payton Gendron selected the Tops Friendly Market on Jefferson Avenue in order to maximize the number of Black victims in his offense. Our 7 News reporter Michael Schwartz outside federal court where this meeting just ended. Michael.
Yeah, good afternoon, Ed. Well, a meeting just wrapped up with families of those who were killed in that mass shooting, as well as survivors. I'm told that they were explained why the U.S. was going after to seek the death penalty and walk them through the court process before that status conference with now 20-year-old Payton Gendron here in federal court. There were about 20 people in that meeting. Again, families of victims and survivors, including Mark Talley, whose mother Geraldine, 62 years old, was shot and killed on that day. Mark, we've gotten to speak a lot in the past more than a year and a half. We sat down yesterday. You told me death would be an easy way out if he is convicted here in federal court.
And I still feel that way. Me personally, I would want him to suffer as long as I'm alive, whether it's 20 years, 40 years, 60 years. I want to see him suffer, being whether county jail or prison close to the city in which he affected so much that day, being surrounded by people he affected so much that day. I would want him to suffer being around those people, not knowing if this is his last day alive or not knowing if he's going to be taking the PC and spend the rest of his life in a small room for 23 hours a day, in which his mind will eventually make him go crazy. I want him to be surrounded by people who will not be afraid to kill him at any moment, any second of the day.
You've gotten letters from inmates throughout New York State that have said, I hope this person falls into their hands, from all over the state. What has this been like through the emotions from getting those letters, going to a meeting here, back with families? Is it prolonging the process of grieving?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's prolonging, but it's getting towards closure. Now, with that said, it'll never be closure after losing a loved one in a hatred attack considered by a white supremacist in an act of domestic terrorism. But it's getting closer and closer for this to finally be over with.
My last question, what was that meeting like? They just laid out their plans in federal court?
Absolutely, just laid out their plans, saying they're going to seek the death penalty.
Mark, thank you so much for joining us. And we are always thinking of you and your family. Of course, it goes back to that tragic day on May 14th, 2022. Now, Payton Gendron, now 20 years old, was sentenced almost a year ago in Erie County Court on state charges to life in prison. But now this is the entire federal process that prosecutors will now go to seek the death penalty. It's been decades, since the 60s, since a state execution in New York State. Well, as far as the United States, that was outlawed in 1988 to reseek the death penalty, but it's been decades, again, since a life sentence was granted in New York State. We will be here throughout the afternoon, throughout the entire day, covering the latest on this now ongoing case and developments here from federal court. We're live in Buffalo. Michael Schwartz, 7 News.
Michael, before we let you go, describe the feeling outside federal court right now. We saw Mark Talley step up to the microphones prior to speaking with you live on the air. We saw Wayne Jones, whose mother was also killed. There are a number of victims who are continuing to pour out of the federal courthouse right now before this 2 o'clock hearing, where we are expected to officially learn from the judge and prosecutors and the defense attorneys that the death penalty is something to be sought by the federal government. What is the feeling outside the courthouse?
Well, you know, it's rehashing a lot of emotions. We were in the federal court lobby. Our cameras are not allowed in there, but Zanetta Everhart, who is now a councilwoman here in the city of Buffalo, came down and she had no comment, usually very talkative to us. She did not have comment. She did seem very unpleased. There is definitely a lot of emotion throughout these families. As you mentioned, Garnell Whitfield, his brother, Kat Massey, who passed away in this racially motivated killing, her sister, which a family member, if you remember, in that sentencing in Erie County Court, charged Payton Gendron. She was just here before. Roberta Drury, her family was here. Pearl Young, her daughter, is just behind me. It's very quiet. But as you know, you were in the courtroom in Erie County Court last February. When these families are together, there's a lot of emotions, but I can't say this enough. The strength of these families, the resilience continues. But I do think that speaking to a lot of them over the months, they did not want the government to seek the death penalty. As you just heard from Mark Talley, they wanted him to suffer in whatever prison he would go. And he went on to write a book called 514, The Day the Devil Came to Buffalo. So there's a lot of feelings of just wanting him to suffer. And I will say this, Ed, as we were discussing, this is now the government looking to seek the death penalty, right. But this is going to be an ongoing process that is going to take a while.
Yeah, this is not going to end anytime soon. A lot of these family members that I've been speaking with as well did not want this outcome. They wanted this process to just simply end because, as we know, had the federal government said that they were not going to pursue the death penalty, that in fact Payton Gendron would plead guilty to federal charges as he has those state charges, as you mentioned last February. Obviously now that's not going to be the case, and this trial to go through the death penalty process is going to take some time. And as you mentioned, also we will hear more from the judge, the federal prosecutors, and the family members, along with the defense counsel this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Eileen Buckley and Michael Schwartz are both going to be inside that courtroom. We'll keep you posted as we get more information. The bottom line here is that the reason they are searching for the death penalty is because of the actions of Payton Gendron on May 14th, 2022. We'll be keeping you connected to the latest developments on air and online throughout the day on WKBW.com. Another
my closing thoughts about this particular story is that, let's say the federal prosecutors give him life without parole. It's still going to be trauma. That day is still going to be known as 514. The day that a racist, supremacist person came from New York State to Buffalo, New York, and commit a heinous crime in Buffalo. And you know, the death penalty is appropriate because at the end of the day, he's gonna die in prison. There's inmates throughout the city and states looking for this person. So whatever prison they put him in, those inmates are gonna get him, and it's gonna end bad for him because what he did was killed 10 innocent people, and injured 3 innocent people, and also changed so many people's lives that day. That was in Tops shopping. People who are now traumatized and won't go back to Tops. People who will be scarred from this for the rest of their lives. Um, you know, any sentence the federal courts hand down, it's not going to bring back the loved ones. And we, as Buffalo Strong, got to be strong. And what Payton Gendron did, he's going to have to pay for what he did. Because what he did was heinous, it was brutal, wicked, it was awful. And at the end of the day, there's a place in hell for people like that. And that's where he will go when he get executed, is to hell. He will have hell to pay. He will pay for what he did. And again, this case do reminds me of the Florida case of the school shooter down in Florida. They were seeking the death penalty, but he pled guilty in state court, and he ended up getting multiple life sentences without parole. And it's different in different parts of the world, in different states, cities. It's different, and in counties, it's different. But we gotta hold people accountable for their actions, and what he did was awful. And he caused so much pain in the black community, so much pain in all the communities. And the sad part is that there was children in the store with their families when this was happening, and children witnessed casualty because of the shooter. And we gotta be examples of stand up for what's right. And what's right here is that he's executed for what he did. Locking him away, you know what I'm saying? Eventually, someone's gonna get hold of him and kill him. So, executing him in this case, would be the only appropriate thing to do at this point. He would have got life without parole, and I think that this should be a message to white supremacists. If you target against the black community and you kill multiple black people as a white supremacist, that this can happen to you, because the federal law is not playing. State law is not playing. They're throwing out life sentences to those who wreak havoc on the communities. They are giving people life, they are giving people death. So think about that before you go out in the streets and commit heinous crimes against other race, because you are racist. It's not gonna look good on you and on your family. And we just gotta again pray. Put your hands in the comment. Pray down below, and comment down below what you think about this particular story. That is the update. They will set a date when he be for the federal trial take place. I don't know when it's going to be, but I will make it live. I will go live that day, and I will live stream it. And if you could do me a favor in the comment section below, put 514 strong. May 14th strong, because we are strong. We're all gonna get through this. It may take time, but we're not gonna allow a person, let alone a white supremacist, to win this fight. We're gonna win this fight. We're gonna make sure he's never, ever walk out of prison either alive. We're gonna make sure he is executed for the day. We're gonna make sure he's forgotten about. This is a new start. If he did, he's gonna have to pay. So 514 strong in the comments, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Well, yeah, tomorrow. Peace.